Cosmonaut are aboard a Soyuz spacecraft 160 feet atop a Soyuz booster, ready to launch a little less than an hour from now at 6:12 a.m. Central Time or 5:12 p.m. local time in Baikonur. You're seeing a live view here of the Soyuz rocket on the Site 1 launch pad at Baikonur. A team of launch controllers are watching over all systems aboard the rocket, which is now fully fueled and ready for launch. No issues have been tracked throughout the day, which began with fuel and oxidizer loading at 1:12 a.m. Central Time or 9:12 a.m. at the launch site, and loading completed about 2 hours later. The launch vehicle's control systems have been prepared and the gyros were just activated. Good morning, everyone, from the International Space Station Flight Control Room. This is Mission Control Houston. I'm Brandy Dean, and I'm joined today by astronaut Kjell Lindgren, who got up a little bit early to come and sit with us on console, give us a little bit of extra insight about what's going on for the astronauts aboard. Thanks so much for joining us, Kjell.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. You know, anytime that we're watching a rocket launch, it's an exciting thing. But a human spaceflight rocket, and then, in my case, a really good friend and fellow classmates, Serena Aunon and Alex Gerst. Really excited to be here to see this launch.
Great, I'm excited too. Would you be up and watching anyway?
Oh, absolutely. So happy to be here in Mission Control with you to do it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Along with the flight control teams around the world supporting the space station program, here in Mission Control, a team is watching over the Expedition 56 crew and station systems and is preparing to support the increase from 3 to 6 crew members later this week with the addition of NASA astronaut Serena Aunon-Chancellor, Russian cosmonaut and Soyuz commander Sergei Prokopyev, representing Roscosmos, and ESA astronaut Alexander Gerst. These three are about to begin a planned 34.5 orbit flight to the International Space Station, with docking scheduled approximately 2 days later at 8:07 a.m. Central Time, 4:07 p.m. Friday in Moscow, where colleagues, friends, and family of the Soyuz crew are going to be watching the events unfold. So, as you mentioned, Kjell, that Serena and Alex are your classmates, and so you've been training all along with them for years now. What does it feel like to see, especially Serena, when it's her first time going up, getting ready to launch?
Well, it is. It's really exciting. I mean, such an exciting day for all three of them. And of course, Alex flew in 2014. He was on a flight that launched about a year before I did, and so it was a lot of fun to see him fly. But really for Serena now, and then Sergey, the excitement that is associated with the launch for them and their families. And it's such a great group of folks. All three of them are terrific crew members. So the Soyuz flight is going to be amazing, and their space station flight is going to be incredible as well.
Do you or other astronauts, do y'all give them tips going into launch day on what to expect, what to be ready for?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we definitely want to provide them with kind of how the days that run up to launch, what they're going to look like, just so that they're able to anticipate the fit checks that we have to do, the suit tests, and when there's some downtime and when they can expect to be busy. Just having that insight is very helpful as you're approaching launch day. Because Alex has done this before, I know that he has also just been coaching his crew all along, and it just helped things to go smoothly, and it makes it a lot of fun.
And I'm sure that's done intentionally, right? You always have somebody who's done it before on the flight.
Well, I think as much as possible, it's good to have a veteran flyer on the flight to, again, just kind of give you a heads up as to what's going on. But of course, in the past, there have been flights where all three crew members have been rookies, and that is certainly the case in our space program as well. But as much as possible, we like to have a veteran flyer as a part of the group to provide that leadership and insight.
Do you remember any advice that was particularly helpful to you going into launch?
You know, it's really funny. There's a lot of ceremony associated with launch day and in fact the weeks that lead up to launch day. And one of those instances is when we were out in Star City getting ready to leave Star City for Baikonur, the 2 weeks that we spend out in Baikonur prior to launch. And there's a departure breakfast, and many of the cosmonauts that live in the local area will come and wish us farewell. And so during our departure breakfast, Alexei Leonov, the first human to do a spacewalk, was at that departure breakfast, and he pulled my crew aside to give us some tips in preparation for our launch. And they specifically had to do with what to do if you started to feel a little motion sick. And he just recommended that we keep our heads very still and just look around with our eyes. And it was just a very surreal moment to be standing there talking with this guy who's a revered hero in Russia. The first human to do a spacewalk, and to be getting advice, just prior to our launch. It was a very surreal situation.
I bet. Well, for Serena and her crew members, they're going to be docking with the Rosvet module, which is also known as the MRM-1, at a port on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment. You can see it pointed out here. And then they're going to be joining the current station residents on board: NASA astronaut and Expedition 56 Commander Drew Feustel, NASA astronaut Ricky Arnold, and Russian cosmonaut Oleg Artemyev, representing Roscosmos. Feustel, Artemyev, and Arnold arrived at the station aboard Soyuz MS-08 earlier this year on March 23rd. And so, Chell, you've also been on that side of the equation, welcoming a new crew to the space station. Is that something you look forward to, or are they going to miss the peace and quiet of having a few days of just the station to themselves?
Well, it's interesting. I never had the peace and quiet of station to myself. During my mission, I had the privilege of flying with Scott Kelly. And so we had at least 6 people on the space station at all times. But about halfway through our mission, we did have the opportunity to welcome a crew that was bringing up a new spacecraft for Scott and Misha, as the Soyuz spacecraft are only certified to be on orbit for 200 days. And of course, Scott and Misha were going to be up there for almost a year. And so we did welcome this taxi crew, bring up a new spacecraft, and did get to welcome my friend Andy Mogensen, another fellow European Space Agency classmate. And it was just so much fun to see, his first kind of foray into weightlessness, moving around the spacecraft, getting to work a little bit as a mentor and helping him to understand, hey, this is where this stuff is. And because we certainly train a lot on the Earth as to the location of equipment and how to use various things, but you have to be reintroduced to it on orbit how things really work. And so getting to be a part of that, and he did amazing. I mean, he came up there and it was like he had lived up there before and did an amazing job. But it was really fun to see that transition.
I bet. Well, speaking of Andreas Mogensen, he is here in the Space Station Flight Control Room with the team that's going to be monitoring today's launch and getting updates from the flight of their Russian counterparts. Flight Director Scott Stover is going to be on console for the launch, and Capcoming for them today is Aki Hoshide of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and Mogensen of ESA, who's going to be the Soyuz specialist on console. During the Soyuz climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry is downlinked to ground stations along the flat path and routed to the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow, which you're seeing a live view of here. If you have questions today during the Soyuz launch that you'd like to get answered during our show, feel free to send those to us on Twitter or social media using the hashtag AskNASA. We'll try and answer a few throughout the day as we head towards that launch, which is coming up at 6:12 a.m. Central Time. We have one spaceflight veteran and two first-time space flyers launching today aboard the Soyuz MS-09 spacecraft to the space station. NASA astronaut Serena Aunon-Chancellor will be launching into space for the first time today. Both an engineer and a medical doctor, Aunon-Chancellor holds a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., a doctorate of medicine from the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and a master's of public health at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. Employed under the UTMB Wiley Bioastronautics contract as a flight surgeon at the Johnson Space Center in 2006, she spent more than 9 months in Russia supporting medical operations for the space station crew members in Star City. And then she was selected as an astronaut candidate in NASA's 20th astronaut class in 2009. During her time with NASA, Aunon-Chancellor spent 2 months searching for meteorites as part of an expedition to Antarctica. She served as an aquanaut aboard the Aquarius underwater laboratory during the NEBO 20 undersea exploration mission, certified as a space station Capcom, and handled NASA medical issues for both the commercial crew and International Space Station operation branches. She's going to serve alongside Russian cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev, who will be also making his first trip to space today. He was born in Ekaterinburg and entered into Raskova-Tambov Military Pilot School in 1992, soon transitioning to Balashov Military Pilot School. He graduated with a bachelor degree as an engineer pilot in 1997 and served as an aide to aircraft commander in Air Force military units located in the cities of Orsk and Ryazan. And in 2007, he served as commander of the Tu-22 M3 aircraft, later as commander of a 52D Air Group of a heavy bomber regiment in Kaluga region, and then became commander of an air group of the 121st Bomber Regiment of Tu-160 strategic bombers in 2009. Selected as a cosmonaut candidate in February of 2011, he qualified as a test cosmonaut in August of 2012 and served as a backup crew flight engineer for Expedition 4546 in 2015 and as a backup crew Soyuz commander in Expedition 5455 in 2017. Now a member of the prime crew, he's going to serve as a space station flight engineer and as a Soyuz MS-09 commander. Alongside Prokopyev will be ESA astronaut Alexander Gerst, who will be making his second trip into space today. Born in Germany, Gerst is a geophysicist and a volcanologist with a diploma in geophysics from the University of Karlsruhe, Germany, a master's degree in earth sciences from the Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, and a doctorate in natural sciences at the Institute of Geophysics in the University of Hamburg, Germany. Selected as an ESA astronaut in May of 2009, he joined ESA in September 2009 and reported for duty alongside Aunon-Chancellor as a member of the 20th astronaut class here at JSC. He completed his astronaut basic training in November 2010 and then traveled to space for the first time aboard Soyuz TMA-13M in May of 2014. He became part of the space station crew as a flight engineer with Expedition 4041, and then on October 7th, 2014, conducted his first spacewalk and locked 6 hours and 13 minutes outside of the space station. Gerst is going to serve as an Expedition 56 flight engineer, and later this year will accept handover from Drew Feustel to assume the role of space station commander for Expedition 57. Again, I'm Brandy Dean, and I'm joined here in Mission Control by astronaut Kjell Lindgren, and we're going to be answering a few of your questions on social media. You can send those in to us as using the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll take a few of those a little later. We're now 44 minutes away from the launch of Expedition 56 crew to the International Space Station. The mission launches under the call sign Altai, chosen by Soyuz MS-09 commander Sergei Prokopyev, named for the mountain range in Central and East Asia where Russia, China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan come together. The crew patch shows the Soyuz flying high above the Earth. The crew call sign is represented by what we see of the planet below, the Beluga Mountains, the highest peak of the Altai. 3 white swans representing the 3 Soyuz crew members are shown by flying towards the International Space Station, with each of the crew members' names and national flags shown around the patch's border. This now is a live view of the Soyuz on the launch pad in Baikonur. We are again about 42 minutes away from the launch with a liftoff scheduled for 6:12 a.m. Central Time or 5:12 p.m. local time. And again, I'm Brandy Dean with special guest Kjell Lindgren from the astronaut office here at Johnson Space Center. We're going to be answering questions today, and you can send those to us using the hashtag AskNASA on social media. We'll go ahead and take a couple of those now. or actually, we'll go ahead and take a look at this B-roll that's coming in from that was recorded earlier today from Baikonur. The crew was awakened at 9:12 p.m. Central Time, Tuesday afternoon, or 5:12 a.m. local time in Baikonur today, about 9 hours before their launch, and they participated in their final pre-launch activities, starting here with the long-standing tradition of autographing the door of the Cosmonaut Hotel in Baikonur. Chill, I'm sure this is something you did. Do you remember where on the door your autograph is?
Yeah, I'm looking at this door. I think that my autograph's on this one, but there are actually several doors. Traditionally, you sign the door that of the room that you stay in, and so there are several doors, and I didn't see my signature there.
And this is another long-standing tradition, right? The blessing for the crew before they go into space. Is that are these things that you look back on and remember fondly, or was it all a blur?
You know, you definitely remember all of these events. They're just traditions that are a part of the run-up to getting your spacesuit on, and you can see them walking out of the Cosmonaut Hotel there towards the bus. They're going to have an opportunity to wave at their families, and all of this is just amazing. And you just treasure each of these events. As you're kind of walking towards the vehicles, you've seen this before as the backup, and it's just neat to be the prime crew and to know that at the end of all of this, there's a rocket launch.
And you see them waving a few different times throughout their kind of journey from here to the launch pad, right? And so this is the crowd that's gathered outside the hotel, and that's media and just a big group of people, and they'll see people that are closer to them a little later, right?
Well, the families actually, some of the guests are actually right there in the front of that crowd as well. And so right now the crew is waving goodbye to everybody here. This bus is actually going to take them to Building 254, where they will start the suit up process and then do the leak tests on their suits. And so, but at that point, there will be another opportunity to talk with their close family members and say goodbye. And it's one of the kind of funny occurrences with this whole run up to launch is all of these multiple opportunities to say goodbye, and some of them are very public, and so you just have to be prepared to wave to your family several times.
And this is what you were talking about just a moment ago with the suit up. This is Building 254 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, and this is where they get into their spacesuits for the day.
Yeah, that's right. And so you'll be donning your suits the next time that you take this suit off. It'll be in your Soyuz spacecraft. So this is something that you've done many, many times as you've prepared for simulations and for your fit checks. And but this one is pretty special because this time you're getting ready to fly.
I'm guessing it's not particularly easy to get into, right? It looks like you need a little bit of help. There's a number of different steps.
It's not too bad. These suits are basically custom made to fit you, and so they're quite comfortable. It's a front entry suit, and you could see the rubber, this kind of flexible rubber material in front. That's actually how you get in. You put your feet in first, and then you pull the top over your head, and then that rubber fabric actually just gets bundled up, folded up, and then a rubber band is wrapped around it several times. 2 of those are wrapped around that rubber material, and that essentially forms the pressure bladder, which is a very simple but very effective way to close off that bladder. And then that all gets zipped up, and you put your gloves on, and then you'll get ready for the leak check. It's a really neat thing to see your spacesuit for the first time. And so, you know, to see your name on a spacesuit, to see the American flag there, it leaves you a little bit speechless.
Looks like Alex is a GoPro that he's carrying along with him there. Who all is in the room with you at this point?
So the technicians that are responsible for the suit, we typically will have management. Our management will just be standing off in the corner. The backup, the astronauts who are backing, the crew that's backing up your crew will be in the periphery somewhere as well, watching this process. And So there's not a lot, and then the flight surgeons. There's not a lot of people, but definitely familiar faces, and that's very comforting as you're getting ready to fly.
I would imagine. And then once they've all got the suits on, they do a leak check, and that's to make sure that if it needed to be airtight at some point during launch, it would be, right?
Yeah, that's correct. The purpose of these suits is really to be used in emergency. There's no time during a nominal flight where these suits are inflated and necessarily holding pressure. They're really only come into play in the event that you lose pressurization within the capsule, and so then the suit serves a purpose to provide a breathable atmosphere, or in the event of some other, maybe smoke in the cabin where you would want to have a pure atmosphere to breathe. And the helmets are sealed up during launch and other dynamic periods of the launch. And the leak test is done just to make sure that all the seals are working.
And there's our backup crew. I know you mentioned they do this kind of in preparation for their own launch to get an idea of what to expect.
Yeah, they sure do. And actually, that backup commander is Oleg Kononenko, and he was my Soyuz commander during my mission back in 2015. And so it's fun to see familiar faces there. Of course, joining Oleg is David St. Jacques, a Canadian astronaut, and then Anne McLean, one of our NASA astronauts in the 2013 class. And so fun to see them as they're kind of going along their own journey as the backups for this particular launch. And what's really exciting about that is that it means their launch is only about 6 months away.
And this is where the leak check part actually starts, right? What we were seeing earlier was a suit up, and this is the leak check.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So what happens here is that they get into the Kazbek seat. That's the acceleration couch that they'll sit in the Soyuz module itself. You can see the knees are pulled up to the chest, strapped in, and then plugged into the gas system. The helmet and gloves are sealed, and we seal up the suit and essentially check to see how long it takes to pressurize the suit to various levels. And if it takes longer than expected, then there's a leak somewhere in the suit that we need to adjust, and we'll typically open the visor and reclose it. We'll close the gloves, open the gloves and close those just to make sure to see if we can get rid of that leak.
And then there's Sergei Prokopyev. It looks like getting to say goodbye to some of his friends and family who are there on the other side of the glass. And the glass is to protect from carrying any germs or bugs up to the space station, right?
Yeah, that's right. The crew has actually been in quarantine for 2 weeks prior to this, and so any contacts or any of the contacts that folks that they will come in contact with during those 2 weeks are also being medically monitored. And the idea is to make sure that the crew is healthy as they're preparing to fly. And this is one of those awkward situations. You know, it's an opportunity to actually talk with your family and for them to again bid you farewell. But you're sitting there facing them for a good 15 minutes. But the cameras are right there over your family members' shoulders, and they're catching everything that you're saying. And so, you know, there's not a whole lot that you want to share with the entire world at that point.
That makes sense.
But it's very fun to see your family, and so for myself, I actually coached my kids. I said, hey, okay, when we're sitting, you know, when we have the glass between us, I want you guys to ask me questions about my spacesuit, just so that we have something to talk about to kind of fill the air during that time.
That makes sense. So we saw Alex Gerst doing his checkout, and looks like now Serena Aunon-Chancellor is getting into place for her leak check. That'll be the last of the three, and then she'll get to move over to the glass as well and talk with her guests there.
Yeah, that's right. So she's doing her leak check here. You can see that she has control of the valve on the front of her spacesuit and is actually controlling the pressure within the spacesuit itself. And looks like she had a good leak check. So now she joins her crewmates and has the opportunity to talk with her family again through the glass here.
Those checks always seem to go pretty smoothly. It doesn't ever seem like there's anything that would slow down launch or anything like that. I guess they've done this enough time over in Baikonur that it's a fairly well-oiled machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically, if something's not something goes wrong with a leak check, one of the gloves has been seated incorrectly, or there's a hair that crosses across the visor seal, and so it's just a matter of opening things up and then shutting them again and redoing the leak check. And of course, the suit techs take great care of these suits so that they're in good shape and ready to go on launch day. You can see that the crew, their families, everybody is just really excited. This is an incredibly exciting time. We're just really hours from launch at this point, and so spirits are high, and it's an amazing opportunity to just share this time with your family and friends.
So this takes place about 4.5 hours before launch, and then just here in a minute we'll see them waving goodbye again as they move on to the next stage of the preparations.
Yeah, that's right. And right before they'll do that, after the crew's had an opportunity to talk with their family, then, as you can see in the video right now, they'll actually have an opportunity to talk with the heads of the space agencies, and these folks have the opportunity to wish the crew farewell as well.
And there's the crew walking out. This took place at 3:12 a.m. Central Time, or 11:12 a.m. in Baikonur. And here they get back on the bus, and they go onto the launch pad.
These scenes are all very iconic. The crew lining up, reporting in, declaring their readiness to fly. These are pictures that we've seen over and over, and so as a first-time flyer, to be a part of this, again, you just almost feel like you're in a dream. Yep, this is an opportunity to again wave farewell to your family, and this is going to be the last goodbye. Once you get on the bus and you're waving at your family, this is the last time you'll see them until you get home.
And I noticed there's marks painted onto the sidewalk there. Do you practice that to know where to stand?
We definitely talk about it. That part we don't practice. But again, when you first get to this parking lot, it's just a wide open parking lot, and so you see those squares over there, and you're trying to think in your mind, how is this all going to work? And so your veteran crew member kind of lets you know where what's going to happen here, and it's pretty easy.
Makes sense that astronauts would be smart enough to figure that out. This is the crew arriving now at the launch pad. The ride took about 25 minutes, and they were able to make it there at 3:37 a.m. Central Time, or 11:37 a.m. in Baikonur.
And this is an amazing thing. You pull right up to the base of the rocket. I mean, you're really not more than 20 yards from the base of that rocket, and so you're, again, folks from your space agency are escorting you up to right up to the base of the rocket here. All these people are standing there right next to this fully fueled rocket. You climb up on that rocket gantry, you turn around, and then wave farewell to all of the people, this incredible team that's helped you make it to this day.
And do you, at this point, take a deep breath and think, okay, this is it?
Absolutely. You're doing that. You're taking deep breaths all along this whole journey, because this represents years, decades of hard work, years of training and preparation for this day, and then that day is finally here. And it's a little like, I always talking with folks that went through the flow. Once you've done your backup launch, and that last 6 months just goes in a blur. It feels like you're at the top of a slide, and you're on this downward slope, and everything starts coming quickly. And this is part of that. Now, climbing up that rocket gantry into this impossibly small elevator. I remember I had my nose in a corner and was kind of smushed in there, and this takes you up to the top of the rocket.
And does it seem very, very far up from when you get to the top?
You know what? I don't recall really having a good view from the elevator. I just remember at the top of the elevator turning around and seeing the hatch that leads into the BAO, which is the habitation module. And so you will, one by one, climb into the BAO. They'll take the overboots off of your spacesuit, and you'll turn around and then drop down into the capsule, and there's a technician in there to help you strap in. It is surreal, exciting, absolutely amazing.
Well, the crew's been aboard now for about 2 hours, and the rocket itself was fueled about 3 hours before launch. On the sides of this Soyuz rocket are two extra designs. The first is an image celebrating 2018 as the 20th anniversary of the first element of the space station, Zarya, which launched on a Russian Proton rocket in November of 1998. And the second graphic is a logo for the World Cup soccer tournament, which is hosted this year by Russia and scheduled to begin in about a week. Welcome back to our live coverage of the launch of Serena Aunon-Chancellor, Sergei Prokopyev, and Alexander Gerst to the International Space Station. The launch pad's service structures components have been lowered, and the clamshell gantry towers have been retracted in preparation for liftoff. Suit leak checks are now underway. Began around 5:35 a.m. Central Time. And the emergency escape system has been armed. This escape tower would fire in the event of a problem during launch. The system is designed to pull the spacecraft and crew clear of the booster, enabling the Soyuz capsule to parachute to a safe landing in the event of an emergency during the launch or early stages of the climb to orbit. As we get closer to launch, we'll see several other events unfold. 4 minutes prior to the launch, the combustion chamber nitrogen purge begins. Then at T-minus 2 minutes and 45 seconds, booster propellant tank pressurization takes place. Events continue as the first umbilical tower separates at T-minus 35 seconds, and the second umbilical tower separates at T-minus 15. Then at T-minus 12 seconds, the launch command is issued, culminating in the launch of the Soyuz spacecraft as the countdown clock reaches 0 at 6:12 a.m. Central Time or 5:12 p.m. local time in Baikonur. During the climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry from the Soyuz vehicle is downlinked to ground stations along the flight path and routed to the Launch Control Blockhouse near the launch pad in Baikonur and to the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow, which you're seeing here. Flight control is controlled from Baikonur until shutdown of the third stage engine, and then it's transitioned over to the Russian flight control team. So, Chell, can you kind of go through with us what happens during launch? The first thing is the first stage of the rocket shuts down about a little less than 2 minutes after launch, and then.
Yeah, that's right, and that's a fantastic first couple of minutes. You know, I couldn't really tell when we had lifted off, and you really can't tell unless you look at the clock, because the engines start to run up about 8 seconds prior to launch and burn off enough fuel so that the weight of the vehicle, the thrust being provided, overcomes the weight of the vehicle, and you slowly start to pull away from the Earth. And you don't so much hear it as feel it. Just feel the vibration of these massive engines running up behind you. And so you slowly pull away from the Earth. Based on the clock starting, you know that now you've actually launched and you've cleared the tower, and you feel the slow onset of acceleration as you're pulling away from the Earth. Definitely feel when those first stages come off, and those stages look like cones, 4 of them on the outside of the base of the rocket. And I remember talking about this with some kids at a school one time, and they said, "Hey, you know what? Those look like carrots." And those are actually named Markovy, which is the Russian word for carrots.
Oh,
and
so they had it right.
They had it right.
All right. Well, then once they do get to orbit, they have a few things they have to do. They oversee the programmed activation of a sequence of program activation sequence of a variety of systems just before the spacecraft passes out of range of the Russian ground systems. And that includes the spacecraft's power supply system, its radio communication system, and the critical motion control system. Then during the first orbit around the Earth, after they reach space, the Soyuz will automatically execute the first 2 of several orbital adjustment burns planned to get the vehicle's path fine-tuned as it makes its way to the space station.
And that arrival to orbit is really identified by shutoff of that 3rd stage, and that's one that you definitely feel is not quite as dramatic if you've watched Apollo 13 and the crew kind of getting slammed forward in their straps, but you definitely feel a quick deceleration. You do get pushed into your straps, and then we have a little toy that's hanging there called the Nevesomosti indicator, which is weightlessness indicator, typically a little stuffed animal. And as soon as that starts to float around, you know that you've made it into low Earth orbit, and that's super exciting.
Do you have time to take that in, or do you have to get right to work?
Oh, you definitely have time to take it in, and you'll I don't know what these guys will do, but there's kind of a spontaneous celebration. We kind of high-fived, and it's really an opportunity to look out the window. But you do have to stay on timeline. You have to be paying attention to your procedures and address the transition to orbital operations.
That sounds really great. The Soyuz rocket itself stands 162 feet tall right now and weighs 680,000 pounds and consists of the Soyuz MS-09 spacecraft inside a protective shroud at the top and the 3-stage Soyuz FG booster below. The spacecraft was mated to its booster, and the 3 main stages were joined together last week on Tuesday, and then the entire rocket began its trek to the launch pad just after 7 a.m. on Baikonur time on Monday, arriving less than 2 hours later, and it was raised into its vertical position for the pre-launch preparations. And Soyuz spacecraft, with its 3 crew members on board, sits high above the 3 stages of the Soyuz booster, which uses kerosene and liquid oxygen as the propellant. And the first stage has 4 liquid engines that are strapped to the side of the core vehicle. Each burns for about 1 minute and 58 seconds before they drop away. You can see what the last few seconds before launch will look like here as the engines ignite. The core engine of the first stage also serves as the second stage, which continues to burn 4 minutes and 57 seconds into flight. And there's a liftoff in this animation that shows you what to expect today. And the third stage of the Soyuz has a single engine that will ignite just before separation of the second stage, helping to push it away. That'll burn 8 minutes and 45 seconds into the flight, and at that point, Soyuz will be in its preliminary orbit.
And there we could see the abort system pulling away, and now separation of those first stage, and especially at night as those 4 rockets fall away, you can see these 4 dots surrounding the main dot of the spacecraft, and that's pretty cool to see.
Do you have a preference on night versus daytime launches?
I think that I would be that we are all happy with any launch.
Anytime you can go to space, huh?
But a night launch is pretty spectacular.
Well, once it does get to orbit, the Soyuz MS-09 spacecraft is scheduled to dock to the space station in about 2 days, 34 and a half orbits after today's launch. That planned 2-day rendezvous will culminate with a June 8th docking at the space station's Rosvet module at 8:07 a.m. Central Time, or 4:07 p.m. in Moscow, where Russian and American dignitaries, guests, and family members will be watching the events unfold from the Russian Mission Control Center just outside Moscow. So that is a long journey for them. I know you got to do it in a little bit less time, right?
Yeah, that's right. So this 2.5-day rendezvous profile was the standard for many years. And then several years ago, based on changes with avionics and other changes with the spacecraft, they were able to pare that down to a 4-orbit rendezvous, which takes just 6 hours to get from launch to the International Space Station. And so that's the launch profile that we used. I think there are several of my colleagues who did the longer profile, and I think it has pros and cons. The longer profile allows you to spend, a good amount of time in this very small vehicle, and that's kind of a neat experience. You're in the tiny Soyuz spacecraft along with the habitation module, and you're living in there for a couple of days and really get a sense of what it's like to be in a small spacecraft for a long period of time, and really kind of a throwback to the Mercury and Gemini days, as well as in the Apollo days as well.
Atop the rocket within the Soyuz MS-09 spacecraft, again, are Serena Aunon-Chancellor, Sergei Prokopyev, and Alexander Gerst, now 15 minutes away from launch. The whole Soyuz spacecraft is 23.5 feet long and weighs 15,650 pounds, comprised of 3 modules. The descent module, situated in the middle, contains the customized seats for the crews. And does this look familiar to you, Chell?
Absolutely. You can see that it looks like pretty cramped conditions in there, but it fits 3 people perfectly. We spent a lot of time in there during simulations, and of course quite a bit of time in there on our way to the International Space Station.
We saw the seats, and I guess these are the control panels that the crew has access to?
That's correct, yep. And you become very familiar with all of those buttons, fuses, valves, and switches over the course of your training, so that by the time that you're flying, your actions within the crew module are really second nature.
And then it also has the life support systems, the batteries for reentry and landing, and the parachutes and soft landing rocket engines that slow the Soyuz down just before touchdown in Kazakhstan. There are also 8 hydrogen peroxide thrusters located on the module that are used to control the spacecraft's orientation or attitude during the descent until parachute deployment. And it has guidance and navigation and control systems to maneuver the vehicle during the descent phase. And then getting a view through its hatch, looking into the orbital module. That's at the top and connects to the descent module via that pressurized hatch we just saw open. It's where the crew has a little bit of room to move around during the flight to the space station, a volume of 230 cubic feet, which probably is smaller than it sounds, right?
That's a pretty small space, but when you combine that with the Soyuz, it's not a bad amount of volume for 3 people for 2.5 days. And,
Really?
and that orbital module definitely adds to that habitable volume. And it's a location where you've got the toilet, where your food is stored, you have access to water, and it's a good place to stretch out.
And then that's also where the docking mechanism is, as well as the antennas that help the space station, or the Soyuz, hook up with the space station. And then the propulsion module houses the oxygen storage tanks, the main engine, and the attitude control thrusters, avionics and communication and control equipment. The propulsion portion of this module handles all the orbital maneuvers, including those needed for the rendezvous with the space station and the deorbit burn at the end of the spacecraft's mission. And then before they are deployed, the 2 solar arrays are folded up against the body of the propulsion module, which separates from the descent module after deorbit burn, along with the orbit module. And the solar panels themselves span almost 35 feet. The entire spacecraft serves not only as the crew's transport vehicle to and from the space station, but also as the emergency return vehicle in the event that the crew should have to leave the space station unexpectedly. Back now with a live view of the Soyuz on the launch pad in Baikonur, 12.5 minutes away from launch, with liftoff scheduled for 6:12 a.m. Central Time today, or 5:12 p.m. local time in Baikonur. A group of NASA representatives is there in Baikonur, just a short distance away from the launch pad. And for an update on activities there, we're going to go now to NASA Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius.
Brandy, it's a warm afternoon here in the Central Asian desert as a multinational crew prepares to begin its two-day journey to the International Space Station. Just 3 days after a trio of space station residents landed northeast of the Baikonur Cosmodrome, another trio is poised to replace them. U.S., Russian, and European space officials and a large gathering of family and friends are here at the Cosmodrome for this launch, which has a diplomatic flavor. The U.S. ambassador to Russia, John Huntsman, is attending today's launch, along with Germany's ambassador to Russia. And ESA's Alexander Gerst is receiving an historic send-off for his second flight into space, with the presence of Germany's first astronaut, 81-year-old Sigmund Jähn, who on August 26th will celebrate the 40th anniversary of his launch from this same launch pad here in Baikonur. After launch and a few hours of rest, we'll fly back to Moscow and await the arrival of the crew at the station on Friday. The Russian Mission Control Center outside Moscow is where we will be to bring you the coverage of Friday's docking and hatch opening. In the meantime, with launch time approaching, we are all set for the start of another mission to the International Space Station. That's it from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Now back to you at Mission Control in Houston.
That again was Public Affairs Officer Rob Navius, who is on site there in Kazakhstan. Back now with this live view of the Soyuz on its launch pad, a little over 10 minutes away from launch. And in just a moment now, the Soyuz vehicle gyros and onboard flight data recorders are being activated. Launch preparations will soon be complete. They should wrap up at 6:05 a.m. Central Time. And again, we're on schedule for today's 6:12 a.m. Central Time launch.
Now the crew has been in the capsule almost for 2 hours at this point, and I can tell you that 2 hours is a long time to be on your back with your knees pulled up to your chest. But there's a period of time where you're just kind of waiting, and the crew actually has an opportunity to choose a couple of songs that they want played during this time while they're waiting. And so I thought a lot about the music that I wanted to have played. And but as it turns out, you have in your mind what this is going to sound like. You're sitting in the capsule, going to listen to songs that are very meaningful for you. And we have a great view here of Serena sitting in the right seat, waving
at the camera.
Absolutely, that's a great view. But the funny thing is, as they start to play the music, you quickly realize that this is being played through your comm and audio headset, which is not a high fidelity, so you could barely even make out what the song is that's being played. But it is a lot of fun sitting there sharing your favorite songs with your crewmates. And you could see that Serena was in good spirits there, very excited.
Had a big smile.
Yeah, big smile on her face, and I'm just so excited for her and Sergey and Alex. Just now, a little over 8 minutes away from launch.
So at this point in the countdown, the Soyuz first and second stage engines are ready for launch, and telemetry has been received from the rocket. Everything going well and moving on time towards today's liftoff at 6:12 a.m. Central Time. Is there much for the crew to do at this point, or they just need to wait?
At this point, there's not a whole lot for them to do. So you've spent a good part of that 2 hours doing leak checks on the suits, looking at the pressures within the tanks in the vehicle, pressure checks within the vehicle itself. And so at this point, you're kind of waiting, and there's annotations within the flight data file that identify, okay, at this time you need to check this, but really for the past 10 to 20 minutes they've just kind of been sitting there.
What's the backup crew doing at this point?
Well, the backup crew, after they drop the prime crew off at the base of the rocket, they climb onto the prime crew's bus. It's the first time that they ride in the prime crew bus, and then that is driven back to where the families and friends are standing to watch the launch. And so the backup crew gets to watch the launch right there with the family and friends of the prime crew, which is really neat.
And if you can't actually be on the rocket, that's probably a pretty good place to be.
It's a great view. You know, for those who have seen a shuttle launch in the past, you're actually much closer during a Soyuz launch, surprisingly close, and so it's just a phenomenal experience to watch this vehicle lift off, to feel the pressure waves coming away from it, to feel the sound, and hear the sound, and then to just see this bright light clawing its way up into space.
6.5 minutes away from launch. The pre-launch operations are complete at this point.
LJ1 copy, everything is nominal.
Another view inside the cabin, looking at the crew. That's Serena Aunon-Chancellor, Sergei Prokopyev, and Alexander Gerst, awaiting their liftoff into orbit and journey to the space station, coming up in 6 minutes now.
Looks like a beautiful day there in Baikonur. Doesn't look like there's a really thick cloud layer above, so the folks up there in the field should have a pretty good view of this launch as the vehicle climbs up into orbit.
And now that we've passed the 6-minute mark, the launch key has been inserted into the launch bunker, and that is a real key. It transitions the launch sequence into automatic mode.
I would hate to be the guy responsible for the key. Forgot the key.
They say that? Less than 5 minutes to go now until launch. The onboard systems have been switched to onboard control. Commander's cockpit displays and controls have been activated, and the crew members are closing their helmets, which puts them on suit oxygen.
And all along during this time, these are very familiar actions. These are things that we practiced over and over and over in the simulator, and you could almost convince yourself that you're in the simulator at this point, surrounded by very, very similar surroundings. But the pace is starting to quicken up here, and you know that you're headed toward launch here shortly.
Four minutes to go now. Fuel lines and other elements of the rocket engines are purged with nitrogen to fireproof them by removing vapors of fuel and oxidizer. And the weather in Baikonur, as Chell was just saying, is clear today with temperatures around 95 degrees Fahrenheit.
At this point, the crew is just kind of making some final glances at the control panel, checking their procedures, making sure everything's ready to go, and just reflecting on this amazing experience that's about to happen.
Two minutes and 45 seconds left. The booster tank is being pressurized for flight. That optimizes the flow of fuel and helps add structural support to the rocket. Does the crew get notices that these things as they are checked off, or are you aware of them?
There's definitely communication that's constantly going in between the vehicle and the launch team, letting them know as they achieve all of these different milestones. And what differs now from the simulators, you start to hear a lot of the mechanical processes as fueling and pressurizations are being completed, umbilicals and various parts of the launch gantry being pulled away. And this is different than being in the simulator, and a reminder that this is the real thing, and that is really exciting.
One and a half minutes to go now. The ground propellant feed has been terminated at this point. Still on schedule for launch at 6:12 a.m. Central Time. Just 1 minute to go now. Soyuz now on internal power in preparation for its flight to the space station.
Everything is nominal on board, ready for launch.
And 40 seconds away, that's the first umbilical tower separating from the booster. Should have auto sequence start now. "20 seconds and counting. The ground umbilical to the third stage has been disconnected. And there's the second umbilical tower now separating. We're 10 seconds,
Ignition,
10 seconds from launch.
oxygen.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See the engines igniting there. And liftoff of Soyuz MS-08 carrying, MS-09 carrying Serena Aunon-Chancellor, Sergei Prokopyev, and Alexander Gerst to the International Space Station for a 6-month stay to
Everything is nominal.
complete research on board the space station.
20 seconds,
Good
nominal.
of us here on the Earth as well as in space.
Crew are fine. 30 seconds.
Beautiful.
Everything is nominal.
Still getting good views of the Soyuz as it pulls away from the launch pad in Baikonur.
Everything's
And launch
stable.
took place at 6:12 a.m. Central Time, right on schedule. Everything
50
going
seconds.
according to plan so far as the Soyuz delivers 930,000 pounds of thrust from its four
Everything is nominal.
boosters and single engine. The first stage of the Soyuz measures 68 feet in length and 24 feet in diameter, burning liquid fuel for the first
Pitch
2 minutes and
your
6 seconds of flight.
Roll. Everything is nominal.
And now 1 minute and 12 seconds and counting into the flight. Velocity is about 1,100 miles per hour.
Systems are nominal. Crew are good.
Still getting great views of the Soyuz. Now 1 minute and 45 seconds into today's flight. One minute and 56 seconds. The escape tower is jettisoned to this point.
And right at the end of the
Everything
video
is
there, you
nominal,
could see
correct.
those strap-on boosters, that first stage coming away and
First stage separation.
tumbling away from the vehicle. Absolutely beautiful.
They drop away at an altitude of 28 statute miles. Soyuz traveling now at about 3,300 miles per hour. Great view of
Parameters
the
are
crew
nominal.
inside the cabin. You see Alexander
nominal.
Gerst at the top of
Crew
the
feeling good.
screen, and Sergei Prokopyev at the bottom. Now 2 minutes and 38 seconds. Launch shroud should be jettisoned now, and the rocket's altitude is 48
jettisoned.
miles above the Earth.
And that's a time that I had annotated on a little sticky note, also annotated in my flight procedures. That's a view of the
Parameters
first time you
nominal.
have an opportunity to look outside your window and see a view from Earth, a view from space.
Crew
And
feeling good.
actually getting a new view here. This is some new external rocket cameras that are going to be replacing some of the in-cabin views that we normally get, looking down as the Soyuz continues to make its ascent into orbit.
LTI 100 kilometers.
Everything performing as expected. Core
Everything is
stage of
nominal.
the
Crew good.
Soyuz is 56 feet in length, 13.5 feet in diameter, with a single engine with 4 fuel chambers providing 178,000 and 222,601 pounds of thrust for its 3 minutes and
210.
28 seconds of
Parameters nominal.
operation. Stage will continue to burn until the 4 minute and 43 second mark. Soyuz uses what's called a hot stage technique. The third stage will ignite while the second is still burning. That's why the Soyuz has an open area in between the second and third stages.
Everything is stable.
How fast does this go by for the crew
Crew
inside
feeling
the
good.
inside the
Parameters
capsule?
nominal.
This goes really quickly, and during this time, you're feeling the constant onset of G-forces, getting up to even up to 3.5, 4 Gs at some points. It's pretty comfortable, though. You're sneaking peeks out of the window
Pitch
every once in a while.
rotation
That
nominal.
first view of the arc of the Earth's horizon with the blues and whites of the clouds is just breathtaking.
Everything continuing to work nominally as the rocket continues to make its ascent.
Everything's nominal. Crew good. Copy.
And 4 minutes and 44 seconds into the flight, the third stage is now igniting, and the second stage will be shutting down. And the core booster also separating at an altitude of 105 miles above the Earth.
Second stage separation.
Second stage separation's been confirmed.
Everything is
We're
good.
actually
Crew
seeing
fine.
some of those panels falling away as that second stage separates.
And so at this point, Soyuz is being propelled by a single engine, the Soyuz third stage. That provides 67,000 pounds of thrust and will burn for 4 minutes and 2 seconds.
So it's amazing to feel the vibration of those engines pushing you into orbit. One of the things that really surprised me was these very discrete corrections as the rocket begins to pitch over and gain horizontal velocity, and it felt like just these very discrete bursts from directional
340,
rockets.
parameters
It
nominal.
was like ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. It wasn't like this just smooth arc, but with these very
Everything's
discrete
good on board.
impulses to actually push
Fine.
you over into this horizontal pitch, and so just a really, really cool experience.
And that's not something you get to kind of feel beforehand or expect.
Yeah, that's right. So even
Your
during our
pitch
simulations, as we simulate a
nominal.
launch, you don't, of course, get to
360
experience the G-forces or what the engines are going to feel like.
Just about 6 minutes and 20 seconds into the launch, everything continuing to go nominally. Inside the Soyuz again, we've got Serena Aunon-Chancellor from NASA, Alexander Gerst from
Third
ESA,
stage,
and Sergei
thrusters
Prokopyev,
working
all
good.
making their way to the International Space
Systems
Station over the
nominal.
next 2 days.
Crew are great.
And this is a unique view. It's neat to actually have this perspective to see how the engine's performing here and to see that second stage
Everything's
fall away
stable.
and see the Earth below.
Yeah, we usually see the Earth from a little bit higher from the International Space Station.
That's right.
7 minutes now in today's flight,
420
all
seconds.
continuing to go well.
Pitch your rotation nominal. Crew feeling good.
Изделие устойчиво.
440. Everything's stable.
7 minutes and 30 seconds now into today's flight. The velocities for the Soyuz now almost 13,500 miles an hour. Once the third stage delivers Soyuz to orbit, and the module is separated, a series of pre-programmed commands will be executed to prepare the Soyuz for orbital operations. Those stored commands are called time tag commands and allow many of the Soyuz systems to be automatically
Everything's
activated by
nominal, we're
onboard
feeling good.
computers at precise times stored in those computers.
Изображение.
And right now the crew is just enjoying the ride, but they're monitoring very closely how the vehicle is performing, and just monitoring systems as they're approaching third stage cutoff.
490 секунд.
Everything is stable. 490 seconds.
500 секунд.
500 seconds.
8.5
Everything's
minutes
nominal,
now into the
everything's good.
flight, everything continuing to go well.
I like this external view, but I kind of miss getting to see the crew
Yeah.
on the inside.
Agree.
520.
Okay, 8 minutes and 52 seconds now into the flight. Third stage cutoff has occurred, and there is a separation. That's the single
Separation.
liquid-fueled engine now shut down and dropped away at an altitude of 126 statute miles. It's performing an
Outside.
avoidance maneuver by
Handing
opening a
over to
valve in
MCC
its liquid
Moscow.
oxygen tank.
Dima is here.
That was awesome.
And we have confirmation. Confirmation now that everything deployed as expected with the
Outside
antennas
Moscow,
and solar
Arvidas.
arrays. We saw the spacecraft separate and the capsule and crew now safely in orbit.
Altai is
Soyuz is
Moscow.
orbiting an altitude of 143 miles by 118 miles, and that orbit will be raised systematically
Moscow,
over the
this is
course of the
Altai
next
1.
2 days to get it into
Having
place
loud and
to
clear.
rendezvous with the International Space
Separation
Station.
112.
So that means that they're in space, right?
That's absolutely right. That is a fantastic feeling to ride that rocket
Gato is
in
off.
just a little over 8.5 minutes, 8 minutes and 45 seconds to make it into low Earth orbit, to feel that third stage cutoff, to see those weightlessness indicators start to float, and for a first-time flyer, it means
Control
that
of the
you've
air. Standing by for first
you've
launch.
realized a lifelong dream to make it into low Earth orbit.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting. Y'all train for so long, it takes years to get there, and then actually 8.5 minutes to actually get to space.
Yeah, it is unbelievable, and so now the crew will be busy with kind of converting the vehicle over to on-orbit operations. But you do take a minute here to just look out the window and just appreciate this amazing experience and having achieved this incredible milestone.
And what's that first view like?
Oh, the first view is absolutely fantastic, and you actually get to sneak some views out the window during the launch, but you don't have the opportunity to just kind of stare out the window like you do once you've made it into low Earth orbit. So to really look back at the Earth, to have that first personal view of the Earth, the arc of the horizon, that thin atmosphere, the beautiful blues and whites of the ocean and the clouds. You've seen it in pictures before, but to actually experience that with your own eyes is indescribable.
I can't imagine. I wish everybody could have a chance to see it. Okay, so again, Serena Aunon-Chancellor, Sergei Prokopyev, and Alexander Gerst are now in orbit, ready to begin making their way to the International Space Station over the next 2 days, and launch did occur as expected at 6:12 a.m. Central Time. Control of the spacecraft from here on out will be overseen by the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow. Okay, so we've been promising to take questions from social media throughout this show, and got a little busy and haven't been able to take some, but we have some time now, so we'll take a few. And I think our first one is from Anja on Twitter, asking, why does it take 2 days for Astro Alex and the crew to get to the space station when it's possible in 6 hours already?
That's a good question, and I'm a doctor, not a orbital mechanics scientist, but my understanding is that essentially because we had the space station, its orbit and phasing addressed to allow the recent return of the crew, it's just the current position of the space station right now made the launch window such that they had to use this long rendezvous profile instead of the shorter profile that we've kind of become used to.
It makes sense. And speaking of being a doctor, Serena is also a doctor, and I know she is very interested in what she's going to be able to do as far as research that involves the human body being kind of a guinea pig, I guess. So is that something that was of special interest to you as a doctor during your time on the station?
Absolutely, and so I had the privilege to serve with Serena as a flight surgeon. So we were both flight surgeons working for Wiley UTMB earlier in our careers before we joined the astronaut office. And so getting to work with her both here in Galveston and at JSC, and then also in Russia supporting operations and training over in Star City, Russia, was phenomenal. So I've known Serena for a long time. She's a good friend, and so it's just been an incredible experience to watch her launch this morning. I know that she, like myself, very interested in the effect that weightlessness has on the human body. That's part of our training, aerospace medicine, how to support the astronauts that we're flying and the various changes that occur. And so I know this is very exciting for her to have worked with these problems in the past, but now to get to experience them, to truly understand how weightlessness feels and how it affects the human body. I know that she's very excited about really about these 6 months ahead.
So you guys don't mind being guinea pigs?
Not at all. Not at all. It's it's an amazing opportunity to be a guinea pig.
All right. Well, let's take another Twitter question. This one, I think, coming up next is from Sonia Wagner, asking or wishing the crew a safe journey, and then also asking, will they manage to tweet while they're on their way to the space station?
Yeah, we do not have internet access from the Soyuz, unfortunately. Maybe someday in the future we'll get that upgrade, but typically we're not able to tweet until we get to the space station and we have access to the high data rate communications from the space station. I'm sure that when we do hear from the crew via Twitter that they'll have a lot of exciting experiences to share.
I'm sure they will. Okay, next up from Dominic. Does the crew have any work to do during the flight, or is everything controlled by the ground?
Well, much of the flight is automated, but certainly the role of the crew is to monitor, and there are some functions that only the crew can perform within the vehicle. They'll be in communication with the ground on a regular basis, just getting updates from the ground and providing the ground with updates as well. But they don't have much of a scientific program during this flight. A good part of it is just enjoying the ride.
Not a bad activity, right?
Not at all, not at all.
Okay, and our next question from Alex goes back to before the crew had actually launched, as they were after they were in their spacesuits. Asked if there were any superstitions they observe, and he mentions eating peanuts. I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, I don't know about any peanut superstitions, but there are certainly traditions that we engage in. Many of them have to do with things that Yuri Gagarin did during his first flight, and so there are various traditions that we observe, like signing the door and the blessing from the priest, and it's really such a joy to participate in all of that. You know, we are guests, partners, and the Russian culture of space flight. They have a long history and many successes, and so getting to be a partner in that, to be a part of that, and experience all of those things that lead up to flight is, you know, including training in Star City and living and working in Baikonur. It's just amazing.
I guess we're getting ready to begin launching from here on U.S. soil again soon with our commercial partners, SpaceX and Boeing. Are there any traditions that you'd like to see carried over or that you'd like to start?
Well, I've got to see some shuttle launches early on in my astronaut career and then as a flight surgeon as well. And I'm familiar that, I don't know if it's recent astronauts would do this, but certainly back in the early days that there was a tradition of steak and eggs for breakfast, and that sounds pretty good to me. So I'd love to see that tradition reinstated.
Okay, and next up we are going to go take a look at some of the replays of today's launch. Those are coming up next here on NASA TV.
Everyone here at the segundos para que
That was a few great replays of today's launch of Serena Aunon-Chancellor, Alexander Gerst, and Sergei Prokopyev from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan at 6:12 a.m. Central Time. They're now safely in orbit and on their way over the next 2 days to the International Space Station, where they'll spend 6 months conducting research off the Earth for the Earth. They're scheduled to arrive on Friday and will be docking at 8:07 a.m. Central Time. You'll want to stay tuned in the meantime for a video file of some of the launch activities coming up at 9 a.m. And then tune back in on Friday for the docking activities. That will begin kicking off at 7:15 a.m. Central Time in preparation for that docking, which will take place at 8:07. After that, we'll also have coverage of the actual hatch opening when they are able to greet their new crewmates on board the International Space Station. That'll pick up at 9:30 a.m. for a hatch opening at 10:05. That's all that we have for you today here on NASA TV, but we hope you have a great day, and thanks so much for tuning in. This is Mission Control Houston.